Okay. So for next time, you're going to be reading the first 13 chapters of Candide. Don't worry, they're very short chapters. It's only 30 pages, right? I'll give you reading questions at the end of class. Just you don't have to give me written answers to the reading questions, but they'll help you find things to focus on, right? And help you to determine what is most important in the novella. Also, we are going to be doing free writes as we do these readings, partly because they will help you generate material for the paper you're going to be asked to write. So as you're reading, think about a quote about which you might want to do a free write. And so look for things where you can, where there's interesting figurative language, or you think you can see part of a really meaningful pattern, right? Or where there's an important contrast being drawn, right? The kind of stuff that we've been looking at up to this point, right? You're going to be trying to pull the implications out of a passage. So, I have also passed out to you just now the assignment sheet for the first major paper. So this is going to be due around midterm. You've got about a month to think about this. A little over a month actually to get the whole thing finished. And what you're going to be asked to do, right? You're going to be making an original argument about the importance of some specific pattern of language or imagery in either Candide or Rousseau's The Social Contract, which we'll be reading right after it. So we're going to do this in 3 stages, right? We're going to do a writing day in class that will produce a draft. So on that day, we're going to go right down to the computer lab. You're going to have the period to write. And, I will be there to answer questions and look over things for you and, so on and so forth, right? It's okay if you want to start before the writing day. If you've actually already got something to work with, that's great. That's good. But yeah, we will be doing some writing in class. Then you'll be bringing your draft to class for peer review on the 4th of October, and the final paper will be due on October 6th. So the draft, to get full credit, will need to be at least 750 words long and not plagiarized, right? As long as it meets those standards, you will get full credit for the draft, right? I will give you feedback on the draft, but I'm not going to grade it qualitatively. You just have to get it done. The paper will be graded qualitatively, right? So you still want to make sure that you are doing the best work you can, even in the draft stage. The final paper is going to have to be 1,000 to 1,500 words long. So it'll be like double-spaced, 12-point font, like roughly 4 or 5 pages when you're done. Okay. Right. Anybody have any questions just about basic instructions here? Yeah, Brittany.
What format does it have to be? The paper does it have to be?
So you mean like MLA, APA, Chicago? Do MLA format. So citations should be MLA format. Does everybody understand what that means? So parenthetical citations, author's last name, page number, right after a citation. And you'll only be citing one author, right? You'll be citing Voltaire or you'll be citing Rousseau. But yeah, it's still good to get in the habit of doing the proper citations. Okay, any other questions just about basic stuff here? I do want to note as well that I give extra credit if you go to the Writing Center. So if you take the assignment sheet and whatever you've got done so far to the Writing Center, and they sit down and work with you, and they send me an email that says, Macon was here and we talked about blah blah blah. right, I will give you half a letter grade extra credit, right? So, you know, if you would have had a C+, it'll get bumped up to a B-, so on and so forth, right? So please take advantage of that. I am also happy to help you with the assignment at any stage, right? So if you feel stuck, or if you feel like you want help with something, or you just want to bounce ideas off of somebody, right? Shoot me an email or come to the office, and I'm happy to work with you, right? You know, you're not imposing, you know, it's not, you know, a problem. You know, this is my job, and I'm happy to do it. Okay? All right, so in terms of what you're going to need to do here, right? So I've kind of made a little cheat sheet for you here. You can keep beside yourself as you're working of all the stuff we've talked about over the past couple of weeks, right? The sorts of things you need to be looking for, and what you need to be able to pull together in order to write an argumentative paper. I do also want to draw your attention to the second side of the sheet here. This is where the grading rubric is. So this is what my basic grading standards are. Now this works kind of like a pyramid, right? So, you know, the requirements for getting a D are implied in the requirements for getting a C, which are implied in the requirements for getting a B, and so on. Right? Does that make sense? So you have to meet the standard, say, for a C in order to get a B. All right, so to get the lowest possible passing grade on this paper, you just have to meet the basic formal requirements, right? It has to be long enough, it has to be formatted properly, it has to be not plagiarized, right? That'll get you a 60, right? That gets you to a D. In order to get up to a C, you have to actually address the assignment, right? You have to actually be trying to do what the assignment asks you to do. You have to demonstrate that you understand the primary source that you're working with, right? That is, you know, the book that you're writing about. Your sources need to be properly cited, and you need to advance a clear thesis. In order to get a B, your argument must be clear, consistent, and arranged effectively. That is, right, with a reader in mind. Like, your paragraphs have to be placed with a reader in mind and a logical structure in mind, rather than kind of just, this is when I thought of this, so this is when I put it in, right? You need to quote your primary source directly. And this is something that I really, really want to be clear about, because I know that in different disciplines, the standards are different. Like, for example, I know in the sciences and in, you know, psychology and sociology, the standard is usually to summarize and paraphrase sources. In the humanities, we don't do that. In the humanities, we do quote directly, in part because a lot of what you're doing is close linguistic analysis, right? I want to see the passage that you are interpreting when you're giving me your interpretation. So it's important that you do quote your sources directly. A B paper also does not treat opinion as fact, right? It shows that you know the difference between claim and evidence, and you do not try to use claims as evidence. And it makes clear transitions between paragraphs. An A paper gives me an argument that is original and nuanced, right? That actually, you know, acknowledges and deals with alternative points of view. You effectively deal with evidence that might contradict or complicate your argument. You give me a balance between argument and evidence. The argument is properly contextualized and free of glaring historical errors, and you follow a single line of argument to its conclusion without digressions, right? That is, there are no weird little side paths or little rabbit holes you fall down, right? Everything goes towards advancing the thesis. So I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to look all this over, and I want you to ask me any questions that you have about this, right? Once you've had a chance to review it. Everybody good? Everything more or less clear? Okay, and if if questions do arise as you're working, right, just come and ask me, right? Okay, before we get started with today's material, I do just also want to show you one quick thing. So if you go to the course page on Georgia View, as eventually we will. Okay, so if you look in the content browser here, I've got a folder for Candide, right? And if you click on that, I've put a couple of resources in here that you can check out that'll help you understand what's going on in Candide. So in particular, right, this little article on Leibniz on the problem of evil, right? If you read this alongside the first part of Candide, it'll give you a good sense of what Voltaire is responding to, right? Remember we talked about a good thesis statement, has a kind of back pressure, right? You're reacting against another idea. This is the idea Voltaire is reacting against. And this BBC radio podcast is an interview with a couple of academic experts who study Voltaire, who study French literature, which helps to explain the context the novel is coming from, right? So yeah, if you check these things out over the weekend while you're doing the reading, I think they'll help you understand what's going on here, right? Okay. I also do want to point out too that we've got this syllabus and assignments folder. I have put the paper 1 assignment in there as well, right? So if you lose the sheet I gave you, you can always just come back to Georgia View, and there it is. You'll find it. You'll find it here. Okay. So let's continue from where we left off last time and talk about weak thesis statements, how to recognize them, and how to avoid them, right? What to do with them when you realize you've written a thesis that isn't viable, right? So remind me from our last session, what does a thesis need in order to be viable? What does a good thesis require? What does it look like?
An arguable claim.
What's that?
An arguable claim.
Yeah. A thesis has to be an arguable claim, right? It has to be arguable. You have to actually make a claim. What else does it require?
It needs to be narrow.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Brittany and Caroline. Yeah, it needs to narrow your scope, right? It needs to focus on one kind of specific idea, theme, or pattern, right? Give you one thing to focus on. All right? And what else does a thesis require? What does it need to be?
Productive.
It needs to be productive, yes. It has to help kind of like provide that spine for the paper that the that the remaining paragraphs are going to branch off from, right? It has to kind of predict that kind of shape that the paper is going to have. Okay, so I'm going to give you some thesis statements that are not viable, and I want you to try to tell me what's wrong with them, right? What's problematic about them. So if, for example, I write, this paper will examine the theme of optimism in Candide. What's wrong with this? What's missing from this thesis statement?
Not arguable.
Yeah, it's not arguable, right? And why isn't it arguable?
It's not an argument.
Is it true or it's not?
Yeah, I'm just telling you what I'm going to do, right? I'm not making any claim about Candide or about the theme of optimism in Candide, right? So this is one of the most common types of weak thesis, right? It's the thesis that just doesn't make a claim, right? You tell me what the topic is, but you're not making an argument about the topic. So what might we do to fix this? What would we have to do in order to make this into a viable thesis? Yeah.
Maybe claim something about the theme of optimism?
Yeah, I mean, that's the simple solution, right? We have to make some kind of claim about the theme we're talking about, right? And one thing that I do want you all to know, I haven't given you the reading questions yet, but one thing I do want you all to note about Candide, right, and it's probably going to be a little hard to wrap your heads around because as Americans, we are hardwired to believe optimism is good, right? Voltaire thinks optimism is dumb, right? That it's really kind of only appropriate for stupid people. So it's an anti-optimism argument. Well, it's not really it's not really pro-pessimism either, as we'll see as we read it. But yeah, well, like he definitely thinks that that mindless optimism is about the dumbest thing you can believe. So you'll have fun with that. But right, so this paper will examine the theme of optimism in Candide. Okay, so and maybe we can sort of like bounce off of what Ethan just said here as well, right? That so. While Candide presents optimism as a mindless philosophy, that encourages passivity, right? If everything's already great or already organized for the best, why do anything, right? Pessimism is also considered a weak-minded system. The preference seems to be for a philosophy of active engagement. Now, this is a little bit long because I was still kind of formulating this as I was thinking, right? And if I was going to make this the thesis of a paper, I'd probably try to cut it down a little bit, right? Make it a little bit less wordy. But I'm actually making a claim now about the theme of optimism in Candide, right? Bless you.
Thank you.
It's still a little long, it's still a little clumsy, you could use some editing, but it is making a claim. And you've always got to make sure that you are making a claim. Now, I'm going to give you another example of the no-claim thesis type that you may recognize from assignments you may have done yourselves in the past, right? So, if I were to say, for example, the most important elements of hip hop music are rhythm, fashion, and confrontational lyrics. I'm not really making a claim here either, right? What am I doing? What's the basic shape of this thesis? What have I got at the end of it?
3 bodies.
Yeah, okay, I think you're recognizing where this is coming from, right? What does this look like? What kind of paper is this?
Informational.
Think more in terms of like a specific form you might have learned in high school.
This is going to be more informational.
Explanatory?
Have any of you heard this term before?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what a 5-paragraph form thesis looks like, right? And I think, yeah, like as you're suggesting, right, the 5-paragraph form isn't really very good for argument, right? Because really all you're doing is picking something that's relatively simple to prove, that has 3 elements, and you're kind of just repeating the introduction at the end, right? You got your introduction with your simple thesis, your 3 body paragraphs, your conclusion. So it kind of teaches you how to organize an idea, right? And how to plan ahead, but it doesn't really teach you how to advance an independent argument with any real complexity. So when you have these 3 elements in a list like this, these are your 3 body paragraphs, right? I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to say, see, these are the 3 most important elements in hip-hop music, right? So what you would need to do to make this better, right, to make this viable, is think about why you chose these 3 things in the first place, right? There must be some common thread that links them together. So if I'm looking at these 3 things together, right, the pronounced rhythm, the specific hip-hop fashion, and the kind of the confrontational nature of the lyrics, what I'm getting from this, the thing that I've selected, is that these are all things that annoy older people. So I could use this to make an argument that hip-hop music is intended to kind of push the buttons of older, more conservative audiences and challenge, a particular status quo, right? Then I'm finding a common element, a common theme that links these things together and making an argument about why it's important, right? So if you find yourself doing this, if you find yourself making a list thesis, and several of you will, right? I will point this out probably in several assignments that some of you will turn in. And I'm going to give you the same advice every time, right? Find the thing that links these 3 things together and make an argument as to why it matters, right? And that's how you transform this into a viable thesis. Okay, so these are the basic types of no-claim thesis, right? Let's try another one. So, if I tell you that while the women's suffrage movement of the early 20th century faced many obstacles they succeeded in getting women the right to vote. And everybody is clear on what suffrage means here, right? Not suffering, right? Suffrage, the right to vote. Why is this not a good thesis?
This is more of a statement than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, is this really arguable? This is a historical fact, right? This is something you could look up in a history book and see whether this is or is not true, right? So when you're dealing with a statement of fact, right, like how might we take something like this and turn it into an arguable thesis? What could we do with this? Any ideas?
You could talk about how the obstacles like transform the movement or something, or like define the movement.
Okay, yeah.
Certain qualities or something.
Yeah, that's a good start there, right? We could think about what some of these obstacles were, right? And whether some obstacles were more important than others, right? Whether there were some obstacles that were not overcome, right? Or what qualities of the movement allowed it to overcome a particular obstacle, right? We could also question, so we could also look for things in, like particularly if we know a little bit about history, right? We can look for things in the historical facts that, you know, are maybe also a little bit questionable, right? So for example, when the early 20th century women's suffrage movement got women the right to vote, did they get all American women the right to vote? Black women were still excluded, right? So you could use that element of the historical fact to make this a little bit more focused and specific and sort of, you know, make an argument as to why that didn't happen as well, right? So you find something in the statement of fact that is questionable, and you try to make an argument around that. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Right. So let's return for a moment to our example from last time and think a little bit about, you know, that cinematic classic of love on a sinking ship, Titanic, right? So, say the fact that Rose still remembers Jack when she is an old woman proves that love conquers all. Did I sound too cynical when I said that? What's wrong with this? Why is this a lousy thesis?
It's kind of cliche.
Exactly. This is a cliche, right? What's a cliche?
It's repeated a lot.
Yeah, it's just one of those, like, kind of like, it's one of those phrases that has been repeated so often it's become meaningless, right? That we often kind of substitute as a formula for having an original thought. So we apply it in situations where it doesn't really apply, right? So for example, if love really conquered all, right? It didn't conquer a friggin' iceberg. So we all do this from time to time, right? So if you find yourself writing a statement like that involves a formulaic, like a phrase that sounds to you kind of like, oh wait, I've heard this before, I know this formula, like love conquers all, or family is everything, or home is where the heart is, or some shit like that, right? Then you know you're falling into the cliche trap, right? And what you need to do is, again, question application here, right? Does love actually conquer all in this situation?
Depends on your definition of all.
Well, okay, right? That's problematic, right? But yeah, let's kind of like think about, what the end result of their love is, right? That Rose survives and goes on to have a life. Jack, not so much, right? So you could actually make the argument that despite the fact Rose still remembers Jack when she's an old woman, their love was the product of entirely situational and contextual, and was the product of a particular set of circumstances, right? So it's still not a perfect thesis, but it's closer, right? You're on your way to thinking your way to one. So always question the terms of the cliche. That's the way out of that particular trap. So this next one, I often have a little bit more difficulty with because I am not a person who has a lot of strong convictions or beliefs. So somebody give me an example, make me an argument of something that is based solely on a personal belief and not evidence. Can somebody do that? Can somebody come up with an argument that's based solely on a personal belief or preference and not evidence? Of course we can. We all do this all the time.
God is real.
Okay. And without taking a position on whether or not that is true, right? Why would that not be a good thesis for an argumentative paper? Yeah, by their very nature, beliefs, right, are not easily proven with evidence. So it would be very, very difficult to make an argument like that in an academic paper because you'd be arguing solely from personal conviction. Now, this is the reason, by the way. I'm sure a lot of your high school instructors probably told you never to use the word I in a paper, right? This is total bullshit. Of course you can use the word I in a paper, right? Professional academic writers do it all the time. So I think they kind of make this a hard and fast rule while forgetting the basic reason for it. The reason that we often want you to reduce the use of the word I in a paper is so that you'll be more objective. Right? We're trying to get you not to over-personalize the argument. Right? There's certainly a place for writing about and discussing your beliefs, whether religious or political or what have you, right? But in general, in most of your coursework, you're going to be asked to do objective analysis of something that you may or may not have strong feelings or opinions about, right? The basic idea is to try to get you to focus on the material itself and interpreting the material on its own terms, rather than through the lens of personal experience or conviction. Okay, so any questions about any of this? Okay, so what I'd like to do, because I'm doing a lot of talking and I can see some of you are getting sleepy, go back to the exercise that we were working on at the end of class last time, right? And try to continue with that. See if you can continue to evolve the thesis statement you started to come up with last class, right? And make sure you're not falling into any of these weak thesis traps. So give it, say, maybe 10 minutes, and we'll see what we come up with at the end of the 10 minutes, okay?
Can we just do it about any topic?
No, you're working with this sheet, remember? Yes. The pieces of evidence about urban planning.
This one?
Yep, that's the one. So remember, what we're doing is we're coming up with a thesis, we're testing it against different pieces of evidence, and then trying to evolve the thesis based on how it does against particular pieces of evidence. Are you okay, Michaela? If you need to step out and get a glass of water, get some water, it's okay.
true. Like, don't most neighborhoods have sidewalks?
Actually, it depends on when they were built, and where you are. So if you're looking at like say old cities in the Northeast, oh yeah, then most neighborhoods have sidewalks. But
Like one here.
well, if you look at the historic core of Americus, right, the part of the city that was built before 1950, yes, you have sidewalks. But as soon as you go out of there, the sidewalks disappear.
I can't really think of any arguments.
Okay, well, we'll talk through it. We'll try to get you there. Okay, so let's see how you're getting along here. And one thing that I do just want to point out here, so I know we keep coming back to this same sheet that I gave you, like a week and a half ago. And this is not because I'm too lazy to come up with new examples for you. It is because scholarship tends to reward careful, sustained, continuous attention to the same thing over time, right? So the more times you reread something, or the longer you spend, say, like looking at a sculpture or a painting, the more you should be able to draw out of it. So what have you all got? Who wants to start?
Well,
Okay, Brandon, go ahead. So what's the thesis you started with, and how did you get there?
So I really don't have a full thesis yet.
Okay.
I have the part of the claim, and I have like 3 things where I was gonna go to make the argument.
Okay.
So right now, I just have while the invention of cars led to an enormous involvement of American neighborhoods and homes. Then I was gonna talk something about how long they sit in traffic for, or like the safety of the kids in neighborhoods, or people who can't really afford cars. I was gonna,
Okay.
get something from that.
Okay, so what you're trying to come up with an argument that encompasses as much of the information as possible, but is still arguable, that isn't too broad. Okay.
I couldn't finish them.
Okay. I mean, I did only give you 10 minutes. Okay. Who else wants to share what they've got? Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
The average American homeowner finds living in suburbs to be better than living in the city.
Okay, and what got you there?
That a lot of these prompts are explaining how suburban neighborhoods are more comfortable for everyone on average.
Okay. Is there anything that are there any pieces of evidence that push against that idea?
As far as the ones here.
The ones one that starts with in the late 1990s.
Okay, and okay, so there's one, right, that apparently there is at least a large subset of people, or was a large subset of people that didn't want to live in suburbs, right? Are there other pieces of information that also might challenge that view?
Suburban neighborhoods rarely offer public transportation.
Okay, which means that you have to have a car to get around, right? What else? There are a couple of others that I think suggest that maybe either the preference for suburban neighborhoods is either overstated or underthought. Are there any that suggest that people don't find suburban neighborhoods as pleasant or comfortable as they expect to? The basic idea of it is just to keep testing the idea, right? And try to push it along. What about the amount of time people spend sitting in traffic if they drive to work?
You're gonna get the same treatment in the city.
What's that?
So you're gonna get the same treatment if you live in a city or in a suburb.
But if you live in the city, you have other options, right? Depending on the city.
You're still gonna be stuck in traffic unless you take a train.
Unless you, yeah, right. If there's a train you can take, right? If you're in a place that has public transportation where you can walk to things, you don't have to spend as much time sitting in traffic, right? What about the point about vacations as well? What kinds of places do people like to vacation?
The places where cars aren't permitted.
Yeah. So what you would need to do is kind of take some of this data that suggests that people aren't as enamored of car-centric development as they might think they are, and try to incorporate that into the thesis somehow, right? And part of the idea here is to give you data points that cut multiple ways, right? So that you would have to try to make these kinds of considerations in order to come up with a decent thesis. So let's give somebody else a chance here. What else have y'all got?
Well, I feel like while roads are being built for driving, people are walking less since there are only a few sidewalks left or not being built.
Okay, that even if people wanted to walk, they couldn't? Okay, and so what data points are you getting that from?
American neighborhoods developed after 1950 rarely have sidewalks.
Okay. Okay, so I think
That's like only
I think what you've got there is very specific, and I think it's partly because you're only relying on that one data point there, right? So what you need to try to do is take that data point and put it into a relationship with others, right? Are there others where you see? Are there other data points that you see that could help you generate a similar kind of claim, right, about walking or driving? And what other kinds of things might those data points together suggest, right? So I think you kind of went too narrow and too laser focused there. And you'll get a little further if you broaden the ideas out a little bit. Anybody else? So we've heard from this half of the room. This half of the room has been much quieter.
I'm good.
Okay, go for it, Clayton. What do you got?
Thesis was suburban Americans very frequently make decisions that revolve around wanting to avoid sitting in traffic.
Okay.
My pieces of evidence that led me to this, where people vote in opposition in their schools, hospitals, and retail centers and their homes.
Okay.
That's because all this, brings traffic to the area you live
Mhm.
in. And I also used to better point, cars are not allowed at resorts like Disney or the Atlantic City Boardwalk where people vacation.
Uh-huh.
They don't want to sit in traffic while on vacation.
Yeah. So I think so I think you're coming up actually I think with a pretty good idea there, right? And I think again like what you want to try to do is pair that with some of these other data points we're talking about, right? Some of these other things we're looking at that suggest that we keep building things that require cars, that require driving, that require traffic, even if we don't actually seem to like it or want it near us, right? So that would be what you would need to apply to try to push this a little further, right? But yeah, I think that's a good start, and I think you've also got like one of those seems to be about X's, but is really about Y kind of formulations going there. So that's good. You've got the shape of a good thesis there. Okay. Anybody else?
I did in modern American landscape, the widespread usage of cars is the most definitive factor of what people will select to live and what their environment will look like. Because like they
Okay.
have a garage, or they might not like cars, they might not live in the city, or they might not live in the city.
Okay, so that whether or not something is built for cars, that people's living preferences are determined by whether or not they want to have to drive.
Yeah.
Okay, and so people who don't want to have to drive, have the option of living in places with public transportation or sidewalks. People who don't want to drive have the option of living in places that don't have these features. So if we take some of these other data points here and try to push this forward a little bit, right? Who historically, at least in recent history, seems to have been winning this debate? Who's getting stuff built in the manner that they prefer? The car people or the no car people?
The car people.
Okay, yeah, the car people are getting their way more than the no car people are, right? So what you'd want to try to do is try to think through the implications of that, right? If you're kind of looking at these various points together, right? Why does it matter that the people who would rather build for cars or build drivable places rather than walkable places have more power apparently than the people who prefer to walk? And then you would be on your way to a good thesis. But yeah, that's a really good start. Caroline?
I can already feel mine going towards the whole statement of fact thing. I'm having.
Okay, so you're having
trying
trouble
to
getting
figure
past
out
that. Okay.
And making connections with the other data points to make it kind of all come together. That's I'm just having a really hard time with that right now.
Okay. Well, what have you got now?
Okay, I used the whole grid patterns.
Okay.
That one. While society's motor vehicles are made mode of transportation today, this was not the case through the 1940s, 50s, as grid patterns aided people in creating convenient, safer walking distances. I never finished it.
Okay.
It didn't really.
Mm-hmm.
That one.
Yeah. Okay. So that is at least based on what we've got here. That is kind of very much in the realm of fact,
Yeah,
right?
that's.
So I think what you would have to do to push that a little further, right? I think that. Like Macon, I think you were a little bit too focused on one thing, right? And I think that what you need to do is try to pull in as many other data points that relate to that, right? You need to identify a stronger pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, then you will be able to push this a little bit further, right? Okay, so we only have a little bit of time left here. What I think I'm going to do, rather than trying to launch into any kind of meaningful discussion of introductions and conclusions. I think we'll save that for next time. I'll bring you a handout that will give you some good examples that you can try to follow. And I'll give you the guide questions for Candide, right, for those first 30 pages of Candide. And remember, again, like these are just to help you try to figure out what's important in the novel, right, and help you generate ideas. You don't have to give me formal written responses. And I also do want to invite you as well, like if you just do not understand what you are reading and you're having trouble getting through it, right, I'm not going anywhere this weekend. I don't have anything better to do. So feel free to shoot me an email with questions. Ooh, that's ominous.
Oh, man, it's raining.
I feel like the Count, you know, like I say something and then thunder crashes. All right, here we go. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to do this.